Hey guys, finally back to talk about Cult of the Cactus Boots. I'm sorry it took so long, but I decided to finish a bunch of the books that I was kind of in the middle of so that I could better incorporate them into my thought here for all my notes that I had from Cactus Boots. But if I do end up misrepresenting anything, hopefully it's not taken as like intentional Orientalism or sophistry or anything like that. I'm still learning here, so please, if you have any links to sources that'll help me better integrate these thinkers into my thought, definitely send them over. I already got a lot of great feedback on the last video. It was everything I was hoping to get out of something like BookTube. But for reference, the books that I read over the last 2 weeks is What is Philosophy and Pure Eminence by Deluzian, Imagine Communities by Benedict Anderson, The Nature of Human Brainwork by Joseph Dietzken, which I'm actually going through a second time, Creativity in Tao by Chen Wan, which was an ebook, as well as a bunch of Juche stuff, and then The Coming of American Behemoth by Michael Joseph Roberto, and then, of course, my perpetual reading of Hegel and Marx and Steven Seagal. And I guess I can start at Hegel and how difficult he's been. Though I find with all the comparative reading that I've been doing, he's a lot easier to read when you integrate him with other thinkers. Because as idiosyncratic that he can be, the beauty of the way at least Hegel begins his philosophy is that there's a consistency to this conceptual flow. You see, Hegel saw the Prussian state as compared to the legalese that brought perpetual civil wars throughout Europe as having a relatively stable master-slave or lord's-bondsmanship relationship. And that means in terms of maintaining its necessary contradictions, not as like a morally good thing. There's no real moralizing. It's just a lamentation of this bureaucratic limbo of the Prussian state, actually. Because to Hegel, and through his experience, the Prussian state has made inroads to balance quelling the demands of the masses, especially through a monarchist and bureaucratic hybrid. Um, this at the same time has allowed capital in, which inevitably creates an imbalance of conflict in the history of overcoming for the state. This is why in the philosophy of right, while saying that the monarchy is this great, powerful entity, Hegel recognizes it kind of has to be done away with. You know, you have to defang this monarch or this executive branch for freedom to be achieved. What Hegel fears, though, in a revolutionary approach is that the populace will seek to perpetuate, merely invert the conditions of what would normally be called class struggle today. And that is really where we have one of the first digressive combatants that Friedenberg takes on. However, in Cactus Boots, this comes in the form of a series of exterior fascist state threats and mental technical roadblocks to revolutionary theory. You see, Friedenberg and Jeff realized that this detritus of the neoliberal hell that spawned their simulated regress is a partial key to escape. In a genius deployment of prop hijinks, not only is this much discussed Dick Cheney particle accelerator deployed to shift the ground of the book entirely, but later on we actually see them use fragments of Cheney himself and this accelerator integrated into this kaleidoscopic universal view of the topology of creation and its planar intersection with the abstract, the concrete, and this looming fascist threat. Now, Hegel doesn't appreciate a figure like Napoleon merely because a mighty figure exercised power, but because what Napoleon symbolizes for determinate action in the course of history to Hegel is the collective spirit marching toward freedom, empowering themselves through the breaking down of an existing power concentration. Rather than like reconfiguring decadence to a new class, although Marx is obviously going to take this up, this becomes the failing of the bourgeois eventually. The Napoleonic tradition is a redistribution of the ideals of personal freedom, which Hegel saw the Prussian state, his own state, and would probably see our states today as in the way of. I kind of find this Dick Cheney thing a perfect choice for continuing the dialogue of passionate creativity and ascendance, because we're talking about the redistribution of pleasure. something we all know Cheney has had more than his fill of. But further, the concept reminds me of the inevitable trap we all come up against when the death or injury of a despotic figure of power comes to light. This is especially in death. There's, you know, lamentation of the battle seemingly lost. You can take Kissinger or George H.W. or Strom Thurmond, and inevitably you see a sort of outcry amongst the left as if that they've won somehow. You see this a lot on places like Chapo Trap House, as if the battle for environment and community end with one of the faux great men departing the war room one last time. This inevitable legacy crafting for elder statesmen like Biden, who finally give in not because of an allegiance to us as a people and the relationship democracy bestows upon that upon representee and representative, but rather it holds on to a naive idea of history. And that their place in it will be written by historians of the same mediocre cloth, thinking some part of themselves immortal. It paints a really poor picture of how we shape reality when we decide that as a result of the final tally of actions, nothing more can be done than to just shiver in the cold remains with them. I mean, to me, I want to see a collective kaleidoscope used to obliterate this racist fantasy of imperialism, not some like Keir Starmer scotch taping of the holes in neoliberalism's liver. I mean, who wants to see the master's house dismantled with its tools? We'd rather let ourselves reclaim passion, which has been taken away for so long, and do away with the tools as they were and make them a totem of the failure of anthropocentrism. Uh, so to create out from the tool and the master and our overcoming a new relationship, unlorded, defanged, and detooled, the ground is then set for apprehending of freedoms. And this kind of makes me think of Marguerite Young when she sets out to write her biography, Harp Songs of a Radical, for Eugene Debs. It's not that she thought he was this great man that needed to be shared in the history classroom, but that it was that everywhere she turned, she saw the spirit of that Debsian America that seems so close for so many starving working class Americans. And this is amidst the civil rights boom, by the way. So, and the new war machine. And she knew that the analysis of the psyche of the world that made America's last great socialist might just give a fuller sense of purpose to, bring rigidity to the new left movement. I mean, obviously, we know that this didn't pan out, and that the left kind of failed us. But the book is here now, like cactus boots, calling to those of us already picking up on those sensations, those of the collective burden. And today we still are in that struggle for personal freedom, but what is even beyond apprehending that is the quest for the creativity of an earth system, as David Miller might call for, or a unified field for Philip Friedenberg, or the much needed window seat on a Churonic bus ride through art as a foil to memory, and memory foil to art, as we see in Marguerite Young, neither existing without the fruits of the sun. It both begins and is only just the beginning, the radiation of energy that impels every living matter, us included. It's as Hafiz says, even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, you owe me. Look what happens when a love like that, with a love like that, it lights up the whole sky. And so we create because the sun lights the sky, asking nothing of us but to follow her footsteps and create. In The Cult of Cactus Boots, we find a surprising answer to Hegel's concern amongst all of this. When we ponder how things go on, Friedenberg takes us not to a utopic world, but another possible utilitarian one, as we discussed in the last video. One where entertainment and boredom mesh for the highest stakes of death drive achievable outside the realm of capital. Outside the realm of capital accumulation, the stock market. And you get competitive irony in this book, which, seems to perfectly show the Deluzian concept of what is missing in Hegel. As dialectics means unity and struggle of opposites for Hegel. Seemingly, our essential conflicts will be grasped, right? There will be no need more to create, or worse yet, for some, is the dialectician stopping the essential creation, the going on. Are we mucking up philosophy with questions unanswerable to a rigorous science that is concerned with problems? The programs crafted for competitive ironing include things like high-speed rails and physics-defying stunts that clearly seem to probe deeper into this problem or problems, that is, the dialectical outcome. We achieve greater and greater clarity, or so we think. Yet for someone like Deleuze or Nietzsche especially, this is still just a sort of mirror or mask or another layer that inevitably must be confronted to address the lie present about what is true or truth. And in a sense, one can read much of Cactus Boots as a Deluzian unfolding or overcoming of dialectical problems that arise from the sense of things under capital. And in the escape from it and the rescuing of creativity, and we see this unfold in one of the ironing contests as we transition away from the kind of like LSD laced color commentary that's ducking and weaving through political and entertainment high and low masks. And eventually, we're kind of thrust into this E. Cummings esque page of lyric poem, which is called the Alchemical Symbolic Word Mash Nixon Monotheistic Western Economic Dollar Gold Fiat Cataclysm Equation, which is both blindfolding the contestants and sung by an opera impersonator amidst a secondhand smoke-out attempt by the Philip Morris investors. Fixed exchange policy maker collapse, putrefaction in sulfur, conjunction, devalued speculative market discontinuity, short-term liability money market instrument monopolies, and the liquidity problem. A speculative American nation, like a person, like gold, is devalued at the time of collapse. Solution of sulfur, of white light, exuberation, fixation. Inflationary monetary claimants erode miracle moon sea currency debts. Cash, gluttony, and the Triffin dilemma equinox. Constant speculative upward discontinuity, investment profit expansion, global economy, fiscal service surplus apocalypse against the common good. The rise of the new Saudi petrodollar demon fury, cryptocurrency income hoax growth, oil gold pool moon worship, repeated synaptic dollar bill screen machine lust, the pagan dawn of the extraterrestrial hyper theory militarized nation corporation, the Keynesian economic treatise on money and the insatiable desire for goods. Many thinking people believe America has seen its best days. Dissension, combustion, dissolution, birth. And hopefully not to get too weird in this construction of this, but I want to tether this to a quote that I have pulled up here as well from Hegel, which is, now, although it may be admitted that every philosophy has been refuted, it must be in an equal degree maintained that no philosophy has been refuted, and that in two ways. For first, every philosophy that deserves the name always embodies the idea. And secondly, every system represents one particular factor or particular stage in the evolution of the idea. The refutation of a philosophy, therefore, only means that its barriers are crossed, and its special principle is reduced to a factor in the completer principle that follows. Thus, the history of philosophy, in its true meaning, deals not with a past, but with an eternal and veritable present, and, in its results, resembles not a museum of aberrations of the human intellect, but a pantheon of godlike figures. And these figures of gods are the various stages of the idea as they come forward, one after another, in dialectical development. The reason I wanted to bring that up is because for someone like Deleuze and Nietzsche, what is seen in Friedenberg's craft in that poem is not just that dialectical development, but the shedding of the masks and the homunculi and the absolutes by confronting them in a creative positive act. A further note is that all of these ironing events are actually in the past, and the reason that I would suspect that this is the alternate faux utopian entertainment complex is that contained there is this recognition that the past is not at stake as it is part of a memory, or for Deleuze, the becoming of life. These events and their possibilities and their dialectic affirm a possibility for the creation of a more just and free existence. And this is something I believe Deleuze is supposed to work out more actually in his books on cinema. So I'm really looking forward to checking those out soon because I feel like that'll be super informative. But I think it's important for me to probably shift into looking at those Greek illusions that I talked about in the other video, especially also in regards to the remarks on dialectical development and the quote from Hegel. Unfortunately, Hegel often misreads, either through arrogance or the failings of the information he accessed, or the two in tandem with these goggles of absolutes that he has. That he goes on as such in systemizing his thought relative to his own ground, and he fails his system by not giving ground to the other more. While Hegel is certainly in part a thinker of complementarity, it's probably right for Taoists to critique aspects of Hegelian dialectic for being weighted more towards conflict and contrast. Um, However, dialectics is a conceit with a far older history than Hegel. I mean, it goes back to Plato in the form that we're more familiar with it in the way that I conceived of it earlier, but I mean, it has its roots in Zeno of Elea and his ideas. I mean, this is obviously largely lost, but Parmenides, his teacher, we have his thinkings, and those are inspired by the Milesian school, and that's all thanks to Thales. And Thales was a student of his environment as much as we know. He's just someone responding to the culture and reality in Asia Minor, much in the way that Lao Ji is responding to his environment in the state of China in his day. Um, Hegel makes some outright incorrect statements about the history of China and the philosophy of the East in general. But I think it's important to remember to keep distinction in this cultural disrespect he imparts. I think it's just pure ignorance and not actually like founded in any racial prejudice that Hegel had. Because, I mean, first off, Hegel could not read or speak Chinese, and he relied exclusively on the rather xenophobic backdrop of German sinology to produce most of what he read. This is usually coming out of the Jesuits. So, as it pertains to important thinkers like Confucius, I found through this really great journal, the Journal of Philosophy East and West. There's this essay that talked about how Hegel would have been reading the English translations. So it seems that he either outright ignores as superficial these key singular statements by Chinese philosophy, or these ideas are lost or underemphasized in the translations. I haven't done that much to look into it yet. But in the same essay, they mention Hegel's affinity for discussing the idea that from the Tao, the one is created, from the one, the two, from the two, the three, and from the three, 10,000 things. And according to Cheng Yuan, who wrote Creativity and Tao, and was a great scholar of Taoism in the 90s and 80s and 90s, he says that the numbers there are like used simply to like intend that there's a need for like some kind of intuitive awareness of the process of differentiation and non-differentiation. So the realization that the multiple diversities of existence emanate from the unity of the absolute realm of Tao. And the numbers symbolize what intellect is unable to explain. So, unfortunately, Hegel is reading too literally and directly the translations before him, and does so through a philosophy that he's already defined. And so, therefore, he sees Tao as too abstract when what is actually being written by the Taoists is an attempt to shed light on what is still abstract and ineffable, much like Hegel's discussions on the ineffable. But I think there is a way to synthesize Tao and dialectics, and it's embedded in the first portion of the phenomenology when Hegel is discussing sense certainty. Hegel explores the relationship we have to the absolute and the ineffable, and what this actually complicates for language and perception. But what is an objective neutral way of studying various philosophical systems is one of the key questions that the journal entry writer asks. And why does having a definite conception of philosophy hinder the study of other philosophical systems? I think we can all agree with the earlier statement by Hegel that I shared, though, that in short, the philosopher is not the philosophy. And with a true thinker of systems and a true systematic thought, the rigorous grounding for that methodology usually means we can still engage with the system and even then do a corrective aim of the influence of ignorance over the systems in which a thinker conveys. While Hegel's comment that Confucius is not worthy of being translated is absurdly backhanded, it's probably important for us to still recognize in the West that despite those backhanded comments and the rejection of Confucianism wholesale, the refinement of thought in modern China today comes out of the same set of critiques which Hegel uses to justify his estimation, namely that reactionary relationship to the state and freedom that Confucianism has. And keep in mind, the understanding in all of this is never that all are complicit in Juche or Third World Maoism or Confucianism or venture capitalism or XYZ. This is just like another one of the beauties of adding Deleuze to my thought, I feel. And it's helped me to really understand the usually flippant and inconsistent relationship to culture and ideology that is present in all cultures and ideologies. uh, so in short, like Confucianism, as Confucius taught it, has been as much a part of the broader Chinese daily life uh, as Juche is for a North Korean, or unitary republicanism would be for a South Korean, or that this Protestant capitalist work ethic is for the average American. The way to a state's goal is marked by inevitable incongruencies and plateaus like these, but more so than that, its trajectory is predicated on the way material daily life can be reified into these social dogmas, which, rather than freeing the people up to be more free, desensitizes us to the way our conception of freedom is manipulated and exploited. So it shouldn't be a surprise then that the more conservative and capitalist road-oriented arms of the CCP today are seeking to relate their Marxian evolution to the Confucius teachings of the past, and that you also have neoliberals in America and the new age anti-politic escapists of America dip towards these same kind of revisionisms and vagaries. And I mean, it's like, truly, when was the last time that somebody invited you to a meditation or yoga instruction, and like it wasn't that like they were the one leading the class, or that it inevitably slips into this talk about God or spirit or higher consciousness in a very ephemeral way. It's rare that the image of a nation actually reflects this rugged exterior of their internalized peripheries. And someone like Hegel would argue that the philosophy taken up by states like America and China and Korea and Russia and etc., while all on different stages of attaining freedom in total, are all anti-philosophical when their ideological motives become one of infringed creation or a pseudo-traditionalist ground. The now is pointed to. This now. Now. It has already ceased to be in the act of pointing to it. The now that is another now than the one pointed to. And we see that the now is just this, to be no more just when it is. The now, as it is pointed to, out to us, is now that has been, and this is its truth. It has not the truth of being, yet this much is true, that it has been. But what essentially has been, gewesen is in fact not an essence that is, kein Wesen. It is not, and it was with being that we were concerned. Take Juche. We can see, whether you accept it as legitimate or as a smokescreen for the Kim regime, that its vague formulation of self-reliance and man's claim over Earth not only formulate a severe revisionism of the Korean folk traditions, but also presents a clear and present danger to the material improvement of the lives of Koreans in the North, which is also contingent upon brutal oppression from us, the West, and a power concentration amongst what becomes the Juche world historical figures. So, like, in Juche philosophy, man is dominant over Earth, but much like industrial capitalism, techno-feudalism, and in, Friedenberg's screen sink horror, meaning that no matter how we approach our organization, we'll always inevitably undermine the autonomy of life elsewhere. I consumed a lot of Juche ideology content over the last few weeks to make sure my assumptions had some validity. Uh, but what I've come away from is the realization that there is something innate in the self-making of society and individuals that makes sort of reflexive the need to anthropocentrize the world system. And there are a lot of scholars like B.R. Myers is one in particular who will point to Juche as a sort of pure propaganda to prevent an understanding of the Korean Peninsula and argue the DPRK is this ethno-nationalist state of the two, despite only the South having consistently engaged in public religious and social purges. But to me, this is sort of hysterical proposition. Really, only makes sense in the fabulously still racist world of Asian studies that is propagated by the American hegemony of education. Uh, I guess, is the argument really that we should come to accept this anti woke notion that other nations are just racist because they want to be evil? Myers is an internationally recognized scholar who somehow has made a career of directly mistranslating or redacting the intricacies of the relationship between the two nations of Korea. And so maybe a more fruitful approach to the international studies is to recognize and come to terms with the legitimate historical and material conditions that led to the current split. Because I guess, I feel like when we do that, we can analyze the DPR critically without disparaging the working class there and, the attempts at freedom. People like Myers will have you believe in this grand ethno-cleansing narrative, which oddly enough sounds a lot like a projection of the 70s and 80s South Korean campaign to justify their belief in why so few defect and why so little revolt actually occurs in the DPRK. And further in Myers' work, occupation by Japan and China and America are treated with far less than equal scholarly rigor. And it's almost like this liberalized fascism that Myers seeks to evoke in the world is sort of less than held back. I mean, Myers in interviews even will lament this strange relationship he sees as his Korean students as having to the North and their history and reunification. And this is all about how nobody cares anymore there. And it's this typical white guy learns his favorite animes and learns the language, realizes those aren't the way that people actually see the world, and rather than actually learn what Koreans are like as people, he cries about their disinterest of his students in his work and in this microfiche of genocide, not even once grasping that it may have to do with the awful material reality that racist monsters like him imposed on the peninsula. Now, I don't wish to go on highlighting crimes that we all commit in relationship to Korea as an attempt to undermine their sovereignty either, but to show that we all are still bound up in this problem of expressing and attaining freedom and wrestling the modes of production and longevity that, outside of our ownership, disrupt this goal. And I'm also not really all that interested whatsoever in the rhetorical games of how our relationship to the earth gains meaning through ourselves and all that new age type of stuff. The point that I think a work like David Miller's philosophy of creativity makes so simple can't be overstated is that to exist and philosophize is to create concepts and interact with them about how we receive the external world over time. But this ability is dependent on what comes before. And the necessary evolution and symbiosis and equilibriums from mitochondrial structure to interstate roadways means that we hamper and put a cap on our creative capacity. We further limit the illusion of freedom through the free appropriation of the world around us. So we then have to ask, how far are we willing to go to evince a sense of progressing towards freedom? And how much does that impede the process itself? But don't look to Korea as alone. Its history and its movements are ours as well. And we should think about the ant colony in the forest and how it relates to the forest itself. How a few million minuscule machines can reshape terrain and transform the way water and nutrients disperse through an entire ecosystem, yet do so in a way slowly, over time, yet on a massive scale that is, seemingly ungrasped by the individual worker ant. It is in its act of becoming and transforming the ineffable. And this collective, unutterable power and clarity that the collective project seeks to attain. Acting like synapses in our brains, strong beyond their tethered tensile strengths, but subject to individual corruption and deviations, weakening the mesh of collective clarity, of creative comprehensivity. Um, the early points about the Tao can directly be overlaid to this situation and how it is corrective to this sort of environmental or mental schism. Uh, when they adapt, you see the beauty of the negation and affirmation of the life cycle and its purest work. We can look to massive Amazon rainforest colonies and how for millennia they have re aerated that soil and then, in a terrifying turn, end up being an added horror to the deforestation efforts of man. Not only do they end up attacking their fellow inhabitants, but in the fear and attempts at survival, an ant colony can misconfigure their digging so far as to result in the starving of the surviving ecosystem of photosynthetic processes. But if we let the smoke dissipate, and if the strikes hold and the machines are finally turned off, miraculously, those devastating ants recollectivize. Without seemingly being worried, they press on to retool their home to its natural state. And some long time later, you walk into that once ashen clearing, and you can see valleys of green amongst mounds of lively brown. It is understanding the gravitas of even these minute beings that I think is really essential to eradicating the hierarchy through which we think human systems. Because so far as we know, we are from the same stock as the mite and the monkey and the mollusk. This is why one of my previous videos was titled "The Pequot Cry Rings the Night." Rings with a W, not an R. It's that the subconscious, the negated space or plane of being absent, is a fully saturated tapestry from which we can wring out the affirmed contents of truth and history and experience through our bringing into the fold, into being, an understanding of the fundamental conflicts of man and man and earth. As Hegel says, this night, this empty nothing, which contains everything in its simplicity. Unfortunately, it seems we rarely see the world in its tactile and sensorily replete way, but when we do, it is a result of either dumb luck, grave danger, or immense philosophical engagement. Its appearance in our interaction can be systematic and determined, or rhizomatic, or genealogical in nature. This is where my recent reading of some of the shorter Deleuze, like What is Philosophy and Pure Eminence, come into my thinking. Because despite the fact that typically I would probably align my thinking to the world of dialectics, the core of this ramble has been to elucidate the problems of philosophy, which is that there is always something new, yet always something that is very much ungrasped. And philosophy as a careless act is its own foil, and we are still unrung, still a blotchy symbol on parchment, which Deleuze wants us to realize are not our actual problems, nor solutions, nor differences, or even negations or affirmations, but rather that the problems and all that society and philosophy attempt to understand or control or direct or overcome are the preconscious oneness of the order of affects and what he calls the affirmative plane of reality. So both have systems, and both are thinking through concept, idea, consciousness, truth. But while Hegel is looking to understand the relations of the linguistic tool he uses, Deleuze seems to me to be asking us to look at the process of these linguistic tools' relation. Uh, the essayist that I had mentioned from the Journal of Philosophy East and West agrees with this. They think that because Hegel was so systematic, he was able to see the problems with Eastern thought. But unfortunately, Hegel works backwards from his own formula in this instance, rather than incorporating the Eastern tradition, which would be great because it's another factor in the philosophical path. Hegel reads Eastern thought contra Western thought. In a sense, Hegel erroneously enters a realm of dualism about the world, at least the world's thoughts. And something akin to the closed interpretation framing Myers gives of Korean philosophy and religion. It's because he's accepted this notion of the state and what is world historical under the guise of the awful, awful knowledge of 19th century sinologists and Jesuits. That Hegel is incapable of grasping the terms with which the Chinese and the broader Eastern corpus interpret the world. And because his understanding of the language and its retranslation issues with German are practically non existent, I guess this is kind of where my head begins to split. I'm trying to unpack the history of Hegel and Germany's relationship to China. Please, if you have anything, do send it my way if you know more about this relationship, because I'm really curious as to like what Hegel's relationship to Chinese thought is, as well as the like historical reception abroad, and then like second language and understanding. Because obviously my journey, like I said, is very much in the beginning with this thinker, and I'm sure I've missed some essential comments on how Hegel reads truth to symbols and how truth relates to the various kinds of symbols that different cultures appropriate. But at the core of all of this is the symbol making and arranging, really. The sign, symbol creator, curator. And of course, I'm not going to debate language development here. I would hope we all can agree that, speech comes first, then we develop language as a written form later on. But rather, what I want to say is that what's important about written communication is that the creation of experience and self relation no longer lives in immediacy or vague recollection there, but can stand as material external to the internal, reconstituted to mean what prior the external had no connection to, despite it being the topic of language expressed by the internal, the illusory self. So, like when the twin Steven Seagals upon elephants trample their own agent alongside the world Earth in the word Earth in the mind paths of the Cactus Boots book as thought, rendering their prophecy complete. Friedenberg reflects on this as the first martyr of the cult of the Cactus Boots. And I want to say that the most important aspect of our relationship to the organization, to the cult, to the event is that when we step outside of it, permeating the new event, the new relation. So while a martyr, while the death of Earth as we symbolize it, our relationship to it as a community of readers within a world system that is tangible, now able to overcome our mythologizing of the Earth, and after our eulogy, coming from the eternal creation of the written word, we can approach the real world soberly, like a consciously willed history, or at least one shaped by a determined action of the masses as opposed to a flagrant inaction of naturally caused beings, or naturally causal beings. Early on, Friedenberg hopes that the Seagals will simply tire and invert their cause towards something more in reach, but what we uncover is that when the desire is purely in the hands of that expropriator of means, then those means dry up before they tire of their desire. So the twin Seagals are destructive separate entities, unified only in an aesthetic appearance of self and goal, and their oneness is a charade, for there is nothing abstracted. They are merely two nationalist digressors, separating themselves from the organic totality of the at the behest of a series of symbols. It would seem they are doomed to wither in the demented dendrites of the book brain, while the rest of us have a chance, because we are not a self-referent only to ourself, but we are a multitude of perceived and exchanged experiences through a manifold of planes. While Seagal may have won the war of the heart-brain connection, or what William Gass calls the fascism of the heart, Jeff and Phil and Rick and Dave manifest new possibilities of realness, processing action until finally their actions take on a process of its own. Whereas the more Hegelian Marxist approach would be to say, to affirm life, we must radically redistribute the pain in life. The Deluzian, Baudrillardian, pataphysical nature of Friedenberg's system, which is to say, to affirm life, we must radically redistribute passion in life. And this would seem to be more a stepping stone not towards the inner, ugly, unshapen side of the mask, nor to a reform through democratization of something that inevitably homogenizes under capital, curdling and solidifying into a souring, whey-incurred mass from the donkey milk baths of Cleopatra that we were wearing. But to feel the briskness of the world freshly on skin in an air clean and clear of the appropriation from might and preserved through the affirmation of the dying light, the waning light of life, of which we are shadows shepherds, becomes the heart with which we read the growth of every grain and the back from which the harvest of creation is distributed. Sacrifice takes on a lot of context depending on the society, but the way that I want to kind of look at it here is a somewhat niche, though not explicitly Greek in formulation, which is to say that sacrifice is a ritualized admission of human guilt about the human capacity to kill other humans, such as in like war, obviously. So when a Greek hero cult is established, a tomb is erected to honor the person, community, or gods, or the deeds that this particular hero they're venerating stood for. And the Greeks believed this imbued the hero's soma or body into the land while simultaneously immortalizing them. But what's interesting is that the Greek hero cult tends to be deeply eschatological, and they saw the relationship to worship and acting as a polis under the regulations to be reaching towards that higher stage or place of being. Now, when I say I want to recover the cult, I'm simply using a different set of words for the call to return to living in worship of life as opposed to consuming and dying. We break ourselves down. We overexert our patience and creativity for alienating rewards from detached higher ups. We have no such veneration for those imposing on our lives. So, once again, it's important to remember that the most important and self defining and group defining day in one's relationship to the cult is when one exits it, whether mentally or physically. This is less about the radical act of free will, but the freedom events from radical reactions to existence. And these really need little to no ad hoc rationalization of the likes that you'll see a lot of thinkers engaging in, like Zizek. And it's this really odd kind of debate over combattalism and what free will and determinism in the philosophical realm can really say or be given the scientific discoveries of today. When Determined and also when Behave came out by Robert Sapolsky, there was a huge philosophical backlash on the nature of Sapolsky's reach into the intellectual debate. Zizek had his share to say in the general discussion, but I find it kind of lacking whenever Zizek tries to use Hegel to evince freedom and our lack of freedom. I could probably agree with him in some kind of form, but to be honest, there's this very, to me, messy, poetic Lacanian logic that I've not devoted my time to yet. So I definitely reserve the right to walk back some of these comments, but suffice to say, it seems to me that when philosophers reach to Freud and Lacan's musings on the unconscious to find some localized center for our free will, as it has ever elusively been defined, they're merely engaging in a kind of sophomoric reduction of the powers of philosophy, which really only happens in such grave and bullheaded ways when the philosopher rethinks the new again, or realize concept to their thought, as opposed to rethinking their thought given new information about reality. Uh, that's not really to say the first relationship isn't at times necessary to begin facilitating the latter, but it is important to recognize that, for example, in our understanding of light and images in the photoelectric effect, uh, the photoelectric effect as we knew it was not defined as the photoelectric effect, but rather when Einstein and Planck before him expressed the mathematical and philosophical concepts, the way in which we understood and the process of understanding had to change. In fact, the math and reason which science operated under at the time led Planck to view many of his hypotheses on things like the ultraviolet light spectrum, which were circumstances of his core theory, uh, to be questionable, not sheerly because some common sense refuted it, but because the mathematical concepts themselves were insufficient at the time to define what was being inferred and observed. It would be nonsensical for him to extrapolate further than to beckon for us to march forward. But luckily, we end up with Einstein and countless others coming after to critique and refine the existing methods of observation and measurement and calculation. And they built a more rigorous and incorporative language for the theory of the photoelectric effect as a result of this overcoming of what seemingly would have turned into a snooze fest of quibbling semantics for the modern day philosopher. In a lot of the critiques of Sapolsky, the author's trap is inevitably laid when they define free will as though Sapolsky is some sort of Oz like figure hiding behind presumptions of grand deceit. But is it not philosophy, which I truly do love dearly, that has led us astray on this? Because I've seen countless definitions of free will posited and countless strawman arguments of determinism put forth. Yet the critics never fail to unveil their own arrogance with their inevitable quip about how Sapolsky can't change their mind or is betraying his thought by trying to do so. It's a kind of simple, overgrown ignorance to the fact that there is an etymology given by Sapolsky, but what does this all have to do with our Greek hero cults and our reclaiming of its unrotted parts? It's to show that when we try to reclaim the sensible praxis of concepts rendered benign by academic incredulity or profit seeking or rent seeking or political sniping or nihilism, they're inevitably battered with semantics to obfuscate the point to those unable to engage with the source material. My reason, therefore, of evoking the cult alongside Friedenberg, that's not Friedenberg, he's disappeared. I found him. The reason is to remind us of the deterministic existence and irrational configuration of society and law, and how we can overcome the cult and the cultish logic as well that already infests itself in the materialization of austerity and anguish of the earth and its inhabitants as a sacrifice to the soma of the elites like Ray Kurzweil. Unable to escape death, they cling to power as a thing in itself across the planet to divorce themselves from their share of the natural pain of existence. And so, what I seek is a sort of pessimism of the mind and optimism of the heart for a congregation of the radically new, out of a sober realization of the truth of physicalist and materialist analysis of our world. And that is to say, if there is a free will, it is the exertion of mass causal effects of a society, the collective power of the demos or the god king or the capitalist upon its inhabitants' further predetermined existence. But then this is no longer some localized event within our mind, making us morally reprehensible or responsible, which we can locate in our brain or direct punishment of retribution upon a person through. It becomes like the mythos drama Nietzsche talks about in the Dionysian cults. Yet instead of a god or godhead in their actions to evoke for us, it is I guess it would be like what Hegel says, the Geist, a group spirit, a consciousness, or for Friedenberg, this unified field from which point of emergence we can hypothesize a consciously willed world of collective overcoming of alienation and re-embrace of nature. What a lot of philosophers and commentators have done so far in critiquing works like Sapolsky's, and doing so is not saying our willed acts is willed and therefore free will and thus free to judge and treat, is to make the error of conflating hard determinism and also the general bridging of historical determinism with this and Marxian ideas of overcoming through things like class consciousness, with the erroneous religious-like projection of fatalism. In reality, hard determinists like myself recognize that because things like this video were determined by prior events that go down a chain, it itself is causal for the relationship the language will perhaps make with others. Therefore, it is bringing into being something that can come to be as it is, in part expected through an observation that I make as an outside observer, while also determining something unique out of its unexpected interaction with whomever you are. And so, as one that's also interested in Marx along this line, I can reflect on this sort of poor philosophical technique in terms of interactions with people uh, on Marx as a thinker of history and revolution and progress. Because as it relates to what else I've talked about, we should think about the rotten parts of that cult, our eschatology and our salvific paradise on high. I guess the question becomes, can we use Hegel and Tao and Marx and creativity within or in creating our cult of negation and overcoming? I would say that absolutely we can if we recognize that this other great blunder in contemporary philosophical discourse is that conflation between teleology and eschatology. Because when Marx speaks of communism as the end goal, he is evoking the sort of idealism of Hegel I allude to his inverting in the previous video. But this goal or end is not an inevitable one in the eschatological sense, that it is divinely necessitated or willed into being despite naturalistic forces. But I think it would seem better to recognize that Marx is philosophizing at this point as a scientist and is making a hypothesis based on observation. And the hypothesis is a open-ended telos that confirms its correlation at this present moment to be causation only if class consciousness emerges and capitalism is superseded by the necessary forms of governance that would preclude something like communism. But even this, for Marx and Engels, is not a final end, but then a paradigm shift and a point of a new beginning, or possibly even some reading you could have is that the actual beginning of history as a consciously willed progression is there. But a determinist Marxist like myself would come to this and say that as our observations leave us today, we are possibly further from that conscious progression than we thought. And it is incumbent then upon us to further unravel history's differences for what they are and to overcome what is a larger iceberg than appears. And that the appearance may only be another inevitable foil for humanity to overcome in their return to nature, away from the alienation of the insular mode of human society under capital. And so we see that the subject is what we are subjected to. I'm looking at the clock here, and I think I certainly said more about some things than I hoped to, and I didn't get to many of my thoughts on Miss Macintosh. Uh, but I'll probably upload that video in a week or so. I'll probably film it today or tomorrow and procrastinate on uploading it again. But thanks, and please let me know what you thought of my analysis, and let me know if you have any critiques of it or any sources you think that will help me on taking this further. Bye.